part one of our series on freight rates, we looked at truck operating costs and why one leading expert says roads would be safer if we paid drivers 60 cents a mile over costs. That's pretty close to how things were done back in the day when unions and trucking companies worked with the Interstate Commerce Commission to set regional freight rates before deregulation in 1980.
I've been doing this this research for 15 years or so. So when I started it, there was still a significant population of drivers who had lived through deregulation and the pre-deregulation years, the regulated industry. Some of which were owner operators, and some of those owner operators, I remember interviewing a guy. I think his license had 4 digits, his operating authority. He had inherited from his father, who had been a coast to coast hauler back in the day, of heavy equipment, and that's still what this guy did. He was in his 70s at the time, and all those older drivers who had been operating small businesses at the time of deregulation told me didn't quite get out of it what we'd hoped. Of course, they wanted access to markets, they wanted access to regulated freight, and they got it. But they also got a lot more than they bargained for in the kind of competition that there was.
Deregulation disrupted the industry, creating opportunities for independent owner-operators at the expense of established regional carriers that had invested in warehouses and distribution centers that were expensive to maintain and unnecessary under the new nationwide operating authority. At first glance, it might not look so bad. The blue line here is total annual trucker compensation, as estimated by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Owner-operators tend to make a little more, but overall, the trend line is the same. This is the trend line that a lot of big trucking companies like to throw around when they're trying to convince people that there's a driver shortage. In pure, raw numbers, compensation has increased since deregulation. Note that even under this most optimistic of scenarios, however, drivers are only making about half of the 60 cents sustainable wage proposed by Dr. Belzer in Part 1. Here's the bigger issue. Money today doesn't buy as much as it did in 1980. And when you adjust for inflation, today's drivers are only making about 10 cents per mile, or less than half of what they were making before deregulation. And here's why.
When truck drivers and the trucking industry is subject to the market, to very strong market forces, and when the cargo owners essentially ended up with all the bargaining power, they could essentially force freight rates down, and that's exactly what happened. As freight rates go down, people still have to pay their bills, and that's when they have a strong incentive to work more hours, do more driving, what have you.
The number of trucking companies doubled immediately after deregulation. Shippers locked in their savings by contracting with third-party logistics companies who agreed to move freight at a contracted rate. Electronic load boards increased the reach of brokers from a single truck stop to the entire nation. And individual drivers, lacking the clout of union representation or a national rate-setting body, began giving away more free services, accepting lower rates and waiving legal rights to broker transparency, and driving longer hours without overtime pay. Market forces, having already cut logistics costs in half, with virtually all of those savings going to stockholders and consumers, are now rallying behind driverless trucking technology, the latest free market offering that promises to cut that already slim margin by another third by eliminating the largest remaining cost: human drivers. Truckers know they need to speak up, but they're not exactly sure how to go about it. The biggest and loudest trucking voice is that of the American Trucking Associations, which represents the interests of large fleets. Independent owner-operators are represented by the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association and several smaller splinter nonprofits that tend to form over a specific issue and peter out over time as market forces, including the public demand for highway safety, push back against some of the shortcuts and workarounds that drivers have developed over the years to pay the bills in the face of falling profits. In part 3 of this series, we'll be going even deeper into this issue of leverage, both commercially and from a regulatory perspective. We'll be dissecting the dynamics of the trucker-broker-shipper relationship and try to answer that age-old free market question, what is our leverage and how can we use it to our advantage? For the Truck Boss Show, I'm Brad Kuhn. I'll see you down the road.